I apologize. It's not where I was expecting it to be. So I am recording this for those who are eligible but cannot be here at the time. And once we actually start the seminar, I'm going to ask everyone to please mute until we're done. And at that point, we can have questions and conversation and anything we want to have. And I want to welcome you to my first Patreon seminar. And this is my first time doing this for Patreon. Obviously, it's not my first time doing a class or even a class on this subject, but it is the first time in a while. So I will ask you to bear with me if I ramble a bit and or so forth. I do have some notes, but I'm mostly going to speak as it comes to me. If you do have a question while we're talking, I believe that you can raise your hand or unmute and just ask it, because certainly we can have whatever conversation we desire to have. But first, my thought was I would first simply speak on the subject, and then we will deal with individual questions. So our topic is magic. What it is, why it works, how to use it. And, in putting this together, I was thinking, I suspect everyone here has already had at least one class of mine involving magic. So what am I going to say that's new? And the answer is I don't know that there's anything I can say that I haven't already put in a book somewhere, or if not in a book, in a vlog. But that doesn't mean it's not worth repeating, and that doesn't mean everyone here has encountered it. And it doesn't mean that we may not deal with it in new ways as we go forward. So I wanted to talk from a somewhat different approach than I use in, for example, the first degree book. In the first degree book, I begin really with talking about the more superficial level of magic, and then going deep to explain what it is and why it works. I thought today I would talk about a little bit about what people think magic is, a little bit about what magic is. And a lot of people, almost everyone, thinks of magic as being supernatural, something that is very rare, something that is very, some people even think of magic as unnatural, that it is somehow a violation of the natural laws of the world that we live in, whether positive or negative. And I do not take that view at all. I think of magic as a perfectly natural process. I think of magic as being a universal process that we are all practicing in every moment that we're alive. We just don't know it. And part of what we're going to talk about today is why that's so, and how to change that to a conscious activity. I'm a believer that we manifest our lives and our universe, that we are very much a player in what is created or co-created in terms of our world. And that when we learn magic, all we're really doing is learning how we do this anyway. But normally it's unconscious. Normally we're not aware of it. Normally it's something that's happening in the higher range of our being. And we'll talk about what we mean by that in a few minutes. Magic, I believe, and if you watch my midday broadcast, you will have seen the other day we were talking about involution versus evolution. We were talking about it at the time of the summer solstice, or winter solstice if you're in the southern hemisphere. And why this is important, my belief is that the part of us that is incarnate in this physical world, which is involuted into this physical world, is only a part of our being. And we'll be talking about the parts of the being in a few moments, but there are many parts of our being that are only barely expressed here and that we only have a limited consciousness of here. We think we know everything about ourselves. But, if we look at, for example, psychoanalysts, studies, if we look at psychology, if we look at shadow work, we can easily see there are a lot of things we don't actually see easily in our lives, leaving aside magic. But of course, in this seminar, we're not leaving aside magic. So I would say, just as there are a lot of things going on in the back of your mind that the front of your mind is not necessarily conscious of, there are a lot of things going on in the higher levels of your being, such as the astral level, that your conscious mind is not necessarily aware of for most people. When we learn magic, we're becoming aware of it. It's not that we're doing something we've never done before. In fact, I've often told the story when I was learning particularly to do channeling or oracle work. But this is true, I think, with every aspect of magic and psychism. I was told, this is the easiest thing in the world once you understand it. But on the way, we make it so difficult. And what I found is that, yes, once I understood what was really involved, it was very simple, but there was no way anyone could explain it to me until I experienced it. Magic is the same way. And magic can be absolutely profound in the things that it does. It is not the perfect answer to every question, every time. Although certainly being proficient in magic is very often a good answer to many questions. But some require additional parts to that answer, particularly in terms of, again, shadow work. And when we do magic, when we learn to do magic, or some people would say remember, some people would say realize, because as I say, we do it every moment we're alive. But when we learn to do it consciously, it's very much like exercising a muscle. And when we learn to do it consciously, we often do it at different levels than we've been doing it unconsciously. So sometimes, as with exercise, it can be tiring, it can be draining, it can be depleting, can leave you with sore muscles. There are things to do about that, but do be aware of it. And as you advance in magic, when you move into new areas, sometimes you'll encounter this same effect, that as you're opening that door, it can be more tiring, more time-consuming than you might have anticipated. I found, as I was studying magic and psychism, and I studied them at the same time, because I really see them as being the same thing, except in active versus passive senses, that when I started, things took a long time because I was just starting and I was just learning. And over time, they sped up and sped up and sped up. I've spoken on occasion, and for all I know, everyone in here has already heard me tell this story, but it's the grandpa portion of my life, so I may tend to repeat stories. When I first started doing visualization, it could take me several minutes for any kind of complicated visualization, or even a simple one when I first started. A guided meditation could take 15, 20 minutes. Years later, that same meditation would be more or less instantaneous, because I had learned how to do it and practiced doing it. Very simple. And I would go to events that did guided meditations and sit there with my eyes closed thinking, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, how long is this going to take? Because for me, it no longer took long, but for the other people there, of course, it did. And I might have said that to myself. I certainly didn't say it to them because I understood where they were. But, and magic is the same way. When you first start, you are going to start with slow steps. As you go, you will go faster. You will learn how to do things better. Notwithstanding the fact that this is a natural process that we do. When you study magic, at least if you study it in the systems that I learned, shadow work is a very important part of what you do. That's dealing with the parts of yourself you don't see. And when you do that, you will very often see why certain things didn't work earlier in your magical career. And it's because you were blocked. You didn't see the blockage. You may have looked for and been unable to find the blockage at the time. But in time, it will be found and unblocked, and then whatever it was blocking would work. But this is a difference between doing things consciously and subconsciously. One of the most important reasons to learn to practice magic consciously is dealing with those crossed internal wires. We often hold ourselves back from the things we want because of internal belief systems or expectations we're not conscious of. And in fact, sometimes take ourselves to exactly what we don't want because of those same crossed wires. That's why shadow work is important. But in our daily lives, before we learn to do these things consciously, we're doing them unconsciously. And so all of those blockages are actually far more in play than we realize, or lack of them. And you may have known people who seem to have the skill of magically manifesting things with no concept that they're doing so. For example, my father had a friend by the name of Margaret who loved to play the lottery. And she could afford to play the lottery because she would win the lottery once a week without fail, so regularly she could plan her budget on it. They were not big lotteries. She could not win the big lottery for anything, but she'd win $25, $50. Good week might bring $100. But there'd always be something. And she'd then reinvest it and take a little bit for herself, reinvest the rest, play the next week. And obviously this was a magical practice, but she had no knowledge of magic or idea that she was practicing it. But she was manifesting this result for herself, in part because she did not have a blockage to prevent herself from winning the lottery, and a belief that, yes, she could, unless it was the big one, in which case she was blocked from doing it. You may also have known people who have the opposite effect, that they cannot win for losing, that everything they try to do goes wrong, and very often the exact same situation again and again and again and again. This is also because of how we unconsciously manifest. That person is working on a karmic lesson. They are working with a severe blockage, and they are repeating it in an effort to try to learn the lesson and release it. What you could do to help such a person is something like soul retrieval or other forms of karmic disentanglement that might give them a different way of detaching from that karma. But of course, they'd have to be conscious of what they're doing to take advantage of this. But we do this in our lives all the time, every day, without being aware of it. And just because we've started to practice magic does not mean that we have become aware of all these things either. It can take a very long time. In fact, I don't know if there's ever a point that you're completely aware of everything that's going on magic. Because so much of it is behind our consciousness. But the more you do, the more you realize, and the less you'll block yourself, the less you will stop yourself, and the more you can consciously achieve what you want. And this all works on the idea of as above, so below. And if you're here, I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of as above, so below. It comes out of the Corpus Hermeticum, the teachings of the Hermetic tradition, which comes out of ancient Egypt by way of the Roman Empire. It comes from a document called the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistes, which is very, very old. And where it comes from before that, who knows? But the idea is that our created world reflects the world of creation. use neutral terms that the creator is always reflected in the creation, and they can never truly be separate from each other. They're always connected. And if you want to see the creator, you can look at the creation and see the creator reflected to you, regardless of how you conceive of the creator. And part of the idea of this is that incarnation is a universal thing, that everything that exists is an incarnation of spirit, whether it appears to be living or not, whether it appears to be conscious or not, that it is still an incarnation of spirit, that it still has a spiritual as well as a physical existence, and that while that spirit can be viewed at many different levels, it can also definitely be viewed as a single energy running through everything that exists. You can view everything that exists, including everything from ourselves to the gods, as being separate, but you can also view them as manifestations of a single energy that is everything. And in many other ways besides. This is the meaning of the diamond analogy, or one of the meanings of the diamond analogy, that the entirety of the stone is more than the sum of its facets. And the facet that you look at the stone from will only show you its own limited view. And when we talk about incarnation, and when we talk about deity, and when we talk about the nature of the world, part of this idea is we can never really see everything. We can only see what's available from our vantage point. And therefore, it's wise to adopt as many vantage points as we can. This is especially true in magic, because if you do not broaden your views while working with magic so that you can come to it from a number of angles, there are things you'll never see, because they may not be obvious from that first angle. So you have to be able to expand your consciousness to truly understand what you're doing magically. Now, of course, throughout history, people have done what's sometimes called low magic without a lot of understanding of what they were doing. And it works without necessarily having understanding of what you're doing. And the reason it works is because we do, in fact, do it unconsciously all the time. And in fact, one of the things that can make, especially what's sometimes called low magic, which is spellcraft, one of the things that makes it work is by bypassing the conscious mind. When you do a burning, for example, you don't bring logic to your burning. You just bring energy. You bring belief. You burn your paper to either send something away or bring something in, and it will absolutely work. But in an intellectual way, it makes no sense, because it's bypassing the intellectual part of your being. It's going straight to the astral, where that doesn't really matter. And this is true really with most magic. It's best not to overthink it. It's like when you bring through an oracle. And I always say, you don't want to analyze the oracle while you're doing it, because you'll stop it. You don't stop and think about it. You let it come through. Then you can think about it to your heart's content. You can analyze it as much as you like, but you do it first. And magic really is kind of the same way. You don't want to I don't want to say you don't want to think about it while you're doing it. That's too big a blanket statement. But almost anyone who teaches about magic will tell you that you must not second guess it while you're doing it. You don't want to keep saying, I wonder if it worked. I wonder if it worked. You want to have confidence in what you've done. You want to do it without analyzing it and picking it apart, because it's interacting with your higher self. And you want to leave the mental self basically to one side while you do it. Afterwards, you can analyze it to your heart's content. Before, you can analyze it to your heart's content. But don't worry it to death. Let it be. And this is very helpful with magic because, again, it's not working on a mental level. it's working on an astral level, what we might call a subconscious or a superconscious level. And you want to put it there in that higher self, in that astral self, and let it do what it's going to do. Now, I said earlier that we would talk about the different aspects of our being, which is very important to my understanding of magic. And the conventional way to speak of the levels of the being, at least in my background, is through the 7 planes of incarnation, the 7 planes of existence, or 7 spheres, or whatever you want to call them. And these are a more or less arbitrary division in the parts of ourself. Why do I say it's more or less arbitrary? Because it's really a continuum, and each thing flows into the next, and the demarcations aren't rigid. But to understand them, we make rigid demarcations. It's a path of growth from one end of the continuum to the other. And as you go through it, you won't necessarily know you've passed from one area to the next. In my background, which I think we all are already aware of, we divide our understanding of the self between the lower self and the higher self. The lower self are the 3 planes that we're already familiar with and that we're easily conscious of. And this is based on the idea that most humans are in the upper part of the mental plane, merging slowly into the astral plane. And I think that one of the things we're seeing with the development of the internet and the way that it's going, and the way things are coming, is that we're moving much more quickly, much faster into the shallow water of the astral plane than I certainly was expecting in terms of time. But the 3 parts of ourself that we're easily aware of, the lower self, are our physical self. We all know we have a body. We can all feel our bodies. Some of us have different relationships to our bodies than others. Some have more use of their body than others, but we've all got one. If we're here participating in this seminar in this way, there is a body that we are attached to it. And that is the first level of the 7 spheres. The second is the emotional level, the emotional self. Some call it the emotional body. We all know we have emotions. Some of us are more in contact with our emotions than others. Some of us have a healthier relationship to our emotions than others, but we all know we've got them. It's a very rare person who does not seem to have emotions, and even they have them. They've just got them all bottled up somewhere. And part of what this means is that even though we've transited from the emotional to the mental plane, that doesn't mean we're done dealing with that emotional plane, doesn't mean we're done dealing with that physical plane. This means we can perceive them more easily. And of course, we know our mental self, what some call the mental body, the mental plane. Some of us have more control of our mental selves than others. Some of us have more ability with our mental self than others, just like the other planes. And we're all still in the process of moving forward. But these 3 parts, physical, emotional, and mental, are the lower self. The self everybody knows they've got, the self everyone is easily in contact with. And that self has no awareness of magic. Those parts of the self, though certainly subject to magic, do not involve any comprehension of what's going on at that level. The parts of the higher self begin with the astral self, which is where magic happens. We all have some awareness of that astral level, but most people have very little. People who work with advanced magical and psychic techniques have a lot more, but I don't think anyone in the human race is too far into the astral plane. But I do think, again, that our entry into that plane is accelerating, that our work with that aspect of our being is accelerating, and our grandchildren will see and know things astrally we can only imagine. But we're, as a species, in the process of moving from mental to astral, which takes a long, long time, because again, we've not really left behind the previous ones. And in fact, you don't really leave them behind, you expand, but we're expanding into the astral. Above the astral is the soul, the solar plane, the solar body, however you want to put it. And this is the accumulation of all of our lifetimes. It's where we store our knowledge that we have gained. It's where we store all of those aspects that come from our physical lives. And the soul itself has many, many physical lives. And I would say also many variations on each one. The soul is very complex. Each of these planes is more complex than the one that came before. Above the soul is the monad. Depending on how you want to put it, the monad is the higher self of the soul, which has many different souls within it. Some people call it a soul family. Some people call it a group soul. But it is to the soul what the soul is to the life. And here is, I would say, a lot of the roots that make us who and what we are. And above the monad is the divine itself, which is that spirit flowing through all things. When we work magic, as people in this incarnation, we're starting on that mental level because we can conceive it. We're powering it in part from that emotional level, because you need to have that emotional psychic energy behind whatever conception of magic you have. And we're using the astral level to affect it. Magic is affected from that astral level. When we work with our chakras, we're dealing with our astral body, our astral level. And this is the level we do magic from. When we talk about the shadow, this too is in the higher self. It's not something we are normally conscious of, though we can feel it. But it is there. Whether we know we're doing magic or not, we're constantly interacting in this way, through conception at the mental plane, powering through the emotional plane, and implementing through the astral plane. We do it all the time, but we just don't normally have an understanding of it. I believe we all create our reality, or at least co-create our reality. And we do this constantly and universally, but not consciously. As we learn magic, we begin to do it consciously. But that doesn't mean there's a point where we're doing it all consciously. There's always that automatic aspect to it, at least in my experience. But you can take more and more control. This is why shadow work is so important. And it's because mostly, even when we're advanced with magic work, we're doing it unconsciously. And that's where the shadow is really in play. Our conscious mind has little knowledge of it, but unconsciously it has tremendous influence. And the shadow is all the parts of yourself that you do not see or acknowledge. It includes your karmic attachments that you're usually not consciously aware of. It often includes fears, belief systems, expectations, trauma that holds you back. All these things are part of the shadow, and it's called the shadow simply because you don't see it. It's not inherently negative. Anything there served a purpose for being adopted when it was adopted, but often it's been outgrown. So when you do magic, that shadow part of you can trip you up. it can stop your magic from being effective for reasons you don't understand. And I'm going to tell another one of those, well, now grandpa stories that I tell all the time. You've probably heard it, but I'll ask you to bear with me. But many years ago, I was intent on starting a romance with someone who I had a tremendous sense of attachment to and a tremendous desire for. And this person seemed to, at least superficially, reciprocate this interest. And so I was attempting to develop this relationship and constantly being blocked. And one day, this blockage was so pronounced that I was waiting at my apartment for this person to come over, ring the doorbell, and we were going to go to lunch. Well, the time came, the time went. I waited a while, and then I called them, and they said, well, you know, I thought you were coming over. And lo and behold, they'd been there. They'd been ringing the doorbell. I somehow missed them. The worst part is I could not see any way I even could have missed them, but I did. So I called Lady Crystal, who I imagine you all know Lady Crystal, but my teacher, and I asked her, you know, what on earth is going on here? And she said, well, obviously you're blocking yourself. And she told me what to do to unblock myself. And I'll give you the short version because you've probably all already heard the story, but it was to write down all the emotions that I had regarding relationships and romance, all the good ones and all the bad ones. And then go back through them 24 hours later, read them again, see if I really believed these things or if they were leftover tapes playing in the back of my head. To go through, reason through them, and just see, is this really something that needs to be lingering in your subconscious? And I found a lot of those things weren't really things I believed at all. They were things that I believed when I was 6. They were things I picked up from much earlier parts in my life, maybe from past lives in some cases, and not things that I really believed. They were based on expectation caused by other people's relationships I had seen. And I was able to dismiss a lot of this. I did that through a burning at that time. And then lo and behold, things moved forward with the relationship. It didn't actually become a full-blown relationship, which I'm quite glad for after the fact. But I got to the point that I was able to see why it wasn't really a good thing, though it did become a good friendship. This is what the shadow does to us and why doing shadow work is important. It helps us to uncross our internal crossed wires, which can stop even the best magic in its tracks without our understanding why. So if as you're learning magic, you find that you have unexpected difficulty in this way, very often it's going to rest in the shadow. And we have all sorts of things on shadow work in the different books I've written. And I certainly can answer questions about shadow work. A simple burning like the one I just described is very effective for dealing with that. With a little bit more training, a soul retrieval is ideal for dealing with it. There are lots of ways to deal with it, but you must be aware that it's there to be dealt with. And so a good magician is constantly alert to what they expect, what they anticipate, what their belief systems are, all of which are part of the shadow. And if they find they're unnecessarily limiting themselves, they will change it. I mentioned Margaret and her lottery winning. Most people could never do that. One of the reasons is they believe they could not. If you believe you can, or if you believe you can't, in magic, you're likely to be right. If you think you cannot do something, magic won't let you do it because you've already set the rule that you can't. You have to at least believe it's possible to be able to do it magically. And if you do, very often you can do it. And if you can't, there's probably an answer in your shadow. Now, another part of, well, let's talk a little bit more at this point on how you do magic. Magic has been with us throughout recorded history and for at least a while before. Has it always been with us? I don't know that I'd say that it has been in any kind of conscious way. I think when we look at the animals, for example, I believe they too are creating and co-creating their universe through unconscious magical practice, which in some circles is called a morphogenic sphere, but that's a whole other seminar. But it's where things are co-created. But I do not see animals seeming to have any conscious control over this. And I would imagine the earliest incarnations as humans or proto-humans, we had no conscious knowledge of how to do this either. We must have developed it over time. But we do see it from from at least as early as humans left any records of themselves, and somewhat earlier. I have written about the evidence for magic among the Neanderthal and people who came before them, and the evidence for religion. And an example is the use of skulls for what appear to be some sort of magical guardian. There is a famous cave settlement which had 7 dwellings within it, if I remember correctly, each of which had a fox skull at the entry to the dwelling. And, to my mind, although we can never be absolutely certain, obviously that must have had, most likely would have had a magical significance, because why else do you have a fox skull at the entrance to your dwelling? It's before interior decorating. So I don't think it could be for that reason. But magic, yes. I would say the fox must have been some sort of magical guardian for them. Could have been a totemic symbol as well, but this is still magic. And you see this also in other finds, particularly from Neanderthal and early modern humans. You see things, for example, there is a portion of a child's skull which was discovered, which had obviously been preserved by their family or people and handled extensively. I see no reason, and extensively means more than one person a little bit. I see no reason you would do that without a magical / religious purpose behind it. Exactly what that was, I don't know, but obviously it was there. From the Neolithic period, we see very clear signs of magic and spiritual understanding. So it's been with us for a long time. And I talked about low magic, which is basic spell work, as opposed to some of the higher theories of magic we're discussing today. Anyone can do spell work without ever delving into why it works. And a lot of people historically would have simply told you it works because it works, which is, I think, a perfectly good answer, just not the only answer. But the problem with that point of view is that when we start talking about the higher levels of magic and the shadow and things like this, it does not reach to those. But low magic, like spell work, works by bypassing the conscious mind and going straight to the astral. If you look at almost any spell, there's very little logic behind it. Might be a little bit, but it is not being done on that level. It's being done at an astral level through the emotional energy being put into it, the focus being put into it mentally, but not through mental understanding. And this works. It absolutely does work, and it works because it's being done at an astral level. As we start to deal with these deeper understandings of what magic is and why it works, we have, I think, a greatly expanded ability to do it and to understand it. It's also frustrating to people who aren't approaching it from that level, because it's a lot less cut and dried. There are a lot more variables when you start working with these different aspects of how you see magic. But I think that they're very important. I think working with the shadow in particular is very important. I can think of people from the Goetic background, which is ceremonial magic, a kind of ceremonial magic. And I've seen one particular author, but I'm sure most of them would say, it works because it works, and you must repeat it exactly so, or it won't work, and nothing else matters. From my understanding of magic, that's not at all how things work. But they can be made to work that way and appear to work that way because you're not engaging your mind in using it that way. But things like your intent, your focus, your shadow, in my opinion, are always in play, no matter how much you're trying to follow someone else's map. It's always, in the end, your own map that's going to matter. So magic is a very individual thing in that sense, that you're always dealing with yourself, that you'll pardon me for saying it, no matter where you go, there you are. Your shadow will still be with you, your expectations are still with you. If you work any amount of serious magic, I think you'll have to deal with these things. Now, how do you do spell work? How do you do manifestation? Again, it's involving these several different layers of your being. It's being done at the astral level, but it's using focus from the mental level, emotion from the emotional level, and sometimes energy from the physical level as well. Well, I mean, really always from the physical level. Sometimes you're more conscious of that than others. So it's a focusing of your being. And there's so many different ways to do it. When we say manifest, we often mean doing it with nothing external. Through, for example, a guided meditation, a focused meditation. Then there's spell work, which uses many external things. And that can be as simple as carrying an amulet or a talisman made from a natural substance whose energy you want to draw upon. For example, you can see I'm wearing a pearl today, Lady Crystal's black pearl. And, or I think perhaps Lady Crystal's gray pearl. But pearls have a very distinct spiritual energy. In particular, they hold on to positive emotion, and they help to build a reservoir of positive emotion to draw upon. That's one of the reasons that they are so beloved historically. They're also sacred to the goddess Venus and similar goddesses who often represent that positive emotional energy. So in wearing this, I'm drawing positive emotional energy around me without my doing anything at all, but being open to it. But that is a kind of magic. That is arguably the lowest of low magic, in the sense that there's really nothing other than wearing it that's involved in it. It is an example. Let me bring up another example. And here we have a necklace of black jet. It's, as you know, in the recent sale of family jewelry, I sold quite a few jet necklaces because they were very popular in my family. But this one I kept for myself. And when you wear jet, there are a number of things you can use jet for. I use it for protection and shielding. It also is good for protecting from negative energies, negative emotions. So in a way, it does correspond to the pearl. And if you're familiar with the regalia of the Corellian tradition, you'll know that jet and pearls have a significance to us, particularly at the level of the elders, in terms of the kinds of energies that we want them to be able to draw upon. Holding that good, repelling that bad. But this is the simplest kind of magic you can do, because all you do is you carry the substance. This is also done through incense. You can burn a certain sort of incense to bring a certain sort of energy around you. There are all sorts of different kinds of incense, obviously. You can use an essential oil, applying it to yourself or other objects for this same purpose in this same way. What I just did, I put on an essential oil, specially blended for me by Lori Blackman, involving a number of energies that I like to draw upon. And by putting it on, I'm doing the same thing that I'm doing by wearing the pearl. I'm putting that energy around me in a simple physical sort of way. That's low magic. Now, higher magic, but still considered low magic, spellcraft, involves taking certain actions beyond just carrying a thing. Burning a candle, for example, with an intent. Using an incantation to focus your intent, your energy. There may be ceremonial actions like making a string of knots or creating a witch's bottle, or any number of other items which are meant to carry that energy forward, or doing a burning, which is meant to send that energy forward. This is another level of magic. And then we have, as I was saying, the more internal level, which is done through visualization and internal focus. A simple example of that we talk about in the First Degree book is cleansing a space by imagining it flooded with light, which is to say with energy. And you might flood it with a yellow energy to cleanse it of any negativity. You might fill that yellow energy with silver stars to raise its vibration and have a stronger cleansing. These are examples of that sort of internal process that does not involve anything external, but they're all magic. And then you get to things like ceremonial magic, which can involve quite complicated ritual actions, which in the end have exactly that same purpose. They're taking your energy, your focus, your astral interaction and sending it forward. And it's all a matter of what works best for you to do this, because different people are going to work differently. In magic, we use a lot of different keys to help us. Although in my experience, the farther we go, the less we need them. But especially when we begin, they can be important. And what is a key? A key is something that through sympathetic magic, which is the idea that like affects like, it represents something else. And it helps to put you into a magical frame of mind. It helps you to make a shift of consciousness from your normal mental level to your astral level to do your magic. Anytime you do magic in a conscious way, you're making that shift of consciousness. It's very important. And all the things that we do magically are really meant to do that. All the keys we use. And I just showed you an essential oil that can also be a key to help me to do magic, as well as imparting its energy on its own. An altar figure can be a key to connect to the energy of a certain deity. A spell box or a spell bottle or witch's ladder is a key to sending forward that energy. People have elaborate, beautiful altars, largely as keys to help them tie into their astral self, to do their magic. Keys can be very important and utterly unimportant at the same time. You never need them, but they can be helpful. The thing that I like to say about magic is that magic is utterly worthless if you can't call upon it when your car is skidding off the road. If the only way you could do magic was through a big ceremonial magic ritual, when your car is skidding off the road, you're screwed. You have to be able to do it in a more immediate way. And my approach to magic has everything to do with that ability to always call upon it. And why do I think of the car skidding off the road? Well, I grew up in central Illinois where we have serious winters and things like ice storms. Your car can easily skid off the road here at certain times of year. And I have been in that position where I had to call upon magic at that moment to have a safe outcome. I also was once T-boned by a speeding truck that I swear hit me somewhere other than the impact showed after the crash, but I had to call on my magic right in that moment. And I believe it worked, and that I walked away from that crash in part because it worked. But all of these things I'm talking about are why I was able to do that. I wasn't bound by a need for external elements. I had the belief that it would work. I knew how to make my shift in consciousness, and I worked through my astral self to make the reality that I needed in that moment. In some other reality, a different outcome may have come. Now, having talked a bit about how to do magic, and I often think the simplest techniques are the best. But some of the deeper considerations of magic, and I just mentioned one, and that was the idea in some other reality, I may not have walked away from this same accident. I've come close to death several times in this life, and I believe, in part because it's what I was taught, but also for various other reasons, that the reality that I am in is not the only version of this life. The earliest teaching I remember spiritually was my grandmother's teaching that if you did not like the life that you had led, when you ended it, you could repeat it and do it differently. Now, I will say that that can happen in every moment you're alive. I believe that time for the soul is simultaneous, and therefore, if there are multiple versions of these lives, they're all at once. You might perceive it as sequential, but it's happening all at once. And so when you make a choice like that, one version may play out one way, another version will play out another. Your point of consciousness will be in only one, but sometimes we can see into others. We call these probable lives, or I beg your pardon, parallel lives. And there are many of them. It does depend how much karma you carry, how many different lives you're likely to be enacting, how many different versions of this life. But your soul is going to have, in all likelihood, more than one. And sometimes they can go in drastically different ways. If you've ever seen the old science fiction program Sliders, where the main characters went from one parallel universe to another, that's basically what we're talking about. And they themselves existed in these parallel universes, or many of them. Not all of them, obviously. But they had very different lives there because they were different. This is one of the higher understandings of magic. I believe that all of us will shift our point of consciousness from one parallel life to another at different points in our being, but that we're normally not aware of this. We may notice some radically different things, but we'll usually dismiss them as our imagination. When we start learning deeper magic, we can do this consciously. It's simply a matter of sliding from one parallel to another. Something you should think very carefully about, because you never know for sure what will change, but you can certainly do it consciously. And I believe that we all do this in a manner of speaking by repeating days or events on occasion. I can remember, even in my childhood, there would be occasions where I had a very strong déjà vu in a situation, which I now believe means I was repeating it. Because the situations I'm thinking of, there was no other real explanation. That sequence of events had not previously existed until that moment. But I believe that I was repeating that moment. I think this happens to a lot of us when we think it's Friday, but it's really Thursday. I was taught that that means we're repeating the day of Thursday. Either Friday was really bad, or something else needed to be changed, and our higher self changed it. Why is this possible? I also believe that in addition to having parallel versions of our one life, our soul has other incarnations going at the same time that we may meet in this life if we're conscious of it. I've met a number of other versions, a number of other incarnations of myself, I believe, over the course of my life. And one of the things that helped me to recognize that was that these people had certain striking similarities to myself, other than what was obvious, because on the obvious level, most of them were drastically different. But when I got to know them, I found those striking similarities. How is all of this possible? And the answer is partly because time and space are an illusion. We are very conscious of them because we are involuted, but the soul is not. The soul is beyond them. I've heard it said that time is a consequence of gravity. And if you've done advanced psychic work, you'll know, for example, that you can read for a person who's nowhere near you, or pick up on a person who's nowhere near you, even to the point of being on the other side of the planet. This is because space is not the separation it appears to be. At the astral level, it's just not there. We can connect no matter where we are. The same is true for time. This is why there are techniques for going back and healing yourself as a child. Because at that astral level, things can still be affected, even though at your mental level, they're in the past. Neither of these things, neither space nor time, has anything to do with your soul. It has nothing to do with the astral plane, the solar plane, the monadic plane, or the divine. It may affect them in ways differently than it affects us, but it does not affect them as it does affect us. This is why there can be multiple versions of one life, why there can be multiple incarnations, partly the complexity of the soul, but also it's not subject to the same rules of time and space. When you deal with advanced magical practice, these are some of the things you deal with. When you deal with advanced magical practice, well, really any magical practice, your goal is to change reality, to make a physical change in what is happening in your life, for the most part. You can only do this because reality itself is fluid. If reality were not fluid, you could not change it. You could not change the outcome of an action. You could not change circumstances. They would just be what they are. There would be nothing you could do. But anyone who practices magic for any length of time knows that this is not, in fact, the case. We know because we've experienced it. It's not that we believe it, we've experienced it. You can change things that logically, without magic, would be immutable. Why am I mentioning all of these things at this moment? And there's a very important reason, which is that when we deal with advanced magic, we run into what I think is the only real danger in magical practice. A lot of people who teach magic like to make it sound very dangerous and oogie boogie. And I think at least if you're following a sensible course of instruction and applying it in a sensible manner, all of that's unnecessary. But when you start doing that advanced work, there's one real danger. That's losing your place in reality. Because when you find out that reality is not as real as you thought it was, when you find out that time is not as real as you thought it was, when you find out that space is not as real as you thought it was, it can mess with you. You have to be in a certain place to be able to take that in stride. Now, if you study magic the way I teach it, you will be in that place in all likelihood before you ever get to those issues, because we stress it from the first day. But a lot of people follow other paths that don't necessarily do that. My father suffered from schizophrenia, which he attributed to having learned advanced magic too quickly and lost his place in reality. Do I accept that? Yes, I do. Do I think that's the only thing that was going on? Not necessarily. But before you deal with that level of magic, you need to have two things in place. You need to understand grounding, and you need to be grounded. We talk about grounding in the lessons that I have written from day one. It's one of the most important things. The second is knowing who you are and your relationship to reality. And it's very important to have that. In Kabbalah, I believe a particular branch of Kabbalah, it was always said that you should be 40 years old and married with children before you even start studying. Obviously, I don't accept that point of view, except in the sense that that's another way of saying be grounded. If you're 40 years old, married with children, you can only become so ungrounded in theory. Now, in reality, that's another question, but in theory, it will keep you grounded. What I would say to you instead is start simple, build up to the complex, do it sequentially. You'll be just fine if you make sure that you stay grounded and you know who you are. There will come a point where you will see all too clearly just how much magic can really do. And that's when you really must know who you are. Because the world won't necessarily still seem quite the same to you. And in fact, I've always felt that there's a certain virtue when you're working with magic at that level to keep it compartmentalized so that your everyday life remains securely grounded. Now let's take a moment to talk about grounding as what it is and how to do it. What do we mean by grounding? In the simplest sense, we mean do not be overwhelmed by the energies you're working with. Every day that you are alive, you're both putting out and taking in energy. You put it out naturally, and so does everyone else and everything else on planet Earth. You take it in naturally, and so does everyone else and everything else on planet Earth. This is why you can walk into a room and if the people in the room are happy and celebrating, you may suddenly feel happy yourself because you're picking up their energy, even if you're not trying to. Or if they're arguing, you may suddenly feel bad because you picked that up from them. It's a very simple example, but it manifests in so many ways. It's why some people really hate to be in crowds because they don't know how to shield themselves from all those other people's energies. It's why other people love to be in a crowd because they're picking it up and feeling really energized. And the difference in those attitudes will tell you a lot about a given person energetically. I'm not a great one for interacting with crowds, but I often quite enjoy being in one or at the edge of one because it does make me feel energized. And I'm grounded enough that it doesn't bring a negative aspect of picking up necessarily the emotional charge beyond the energy itself. I can reject what is not wanted. But because we all do this unconsciously rather, consciously we need to shield. We need to ground. To ground is releasing all that energy that is not your own. Shielding is keeping it out in the first place. We talk about a lot of ways of shielding in first degree. The simplest is to put around yourself a barrier of white light in the form of a sphere that you are within. If you need a lot of shielding, you can surround yourself with a curtain of black to repel any negativity, to make yourself invisible, or with a mirror to literally turn back whatever unwelcome influence is coming. These are simple forms of shielding. A traditional folk magic way of shielding was to take a small mirror and put it in the front window of your house. to reflect negativity. And you'll readily see it's the same idea. It's also where these so-called witches' balls, which were mirrored garden balls, they come from that same idea as well of repelling negativity. But it's important to stay grounded. It's important to shield. And if you're not grounded, you will know. Not being grounded can make you feel, well, ungrounded, disconnected. Sometimes you feel like you're walking a foot off the ground, literally. It can make you feel unfocused. It can make you sleepy, or alternately, it can stop you from sleeping. Anything like that suggests that you're ungrounded. If you feel dizzy, if you feel lightheaded, this can be being ungrounded also. Now, of course, there are also other things that can cause that, because we all have a physical body. There can be medical things too. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about direct relationship to energy. These are things that being ungrounded can cause you. And how do you ground? Simplest thing is just release it. Imagine it like water or light pouring through you, pouring down through your hands and your feet, out and away from you. There are a dozen other ways to do it too. That's the one that I do. I find it simplest. If you wanted to do more, I would refer you to chapter 1 of First Degree, which has several different techniques within it. But we've come to grounding basically at the end of our seminar to reflect its importance, because we've already talked about why it's important. To be ungrounded is going to damage your ability to do anything else, particularly if you're profoundly ungrounded. I often remark that when I first started working for psychic fairs, I worked for the D&H fair system, most of whose readers were spiritualists. Spiritualism teaches some very advanced psychic techniques, but grounding mostly is not one of them, at least in that background. Therefore, they had some profoundly ungrounded psychics. And you could tell, because they were, quote, spacey, end quote. They seemed to have no practicality on some occasions. Sometimes they were glassy-eyed and barely seemed to be there. These are all signs of being ungrounded. And it's very simple to ground. But what was happening, of course, is they were reading for people, taking in their energy and not letting it back out. And it was frying their circuits. And that's what it will do over time. So speaking of those real dangers of magic, frying out your circuits from never grounding is also one of those real dangers of magic. Most other things can be dealt with, other than those things we've talked about. Many other things are simply superstitions. I will take a moment to address some of that superstition, because there are people who are terrified of magical and psychic work for fear that it's going to do this or it's going to do that. Nothing can be manifested without energy. If you think you've done something that you should not have done, ground all the energy, cut the energy off. Nothing can manifest. If you're having an unpleasant experience with a haunting or a poltergeist, cut off the energy. You will cut off the manifestation. Whether it's an actual haunting with a spirit caught between the worlds, or a poltergeist, which is a manifestation from a living being, they're both only able to manifest by using the ambient energy in the location. Ground that energy, they won't be able to manifest. This is how to handle the things most people are afraid of in magic. But those deeper issues of either frying your circuitry or losing your place in reality are another matter. But they are dealt with ultimately in the same way by, again, being well grounded, being well shielded, knowing who you are and what you want. And if you do those things, you should be just fine in the practice of magic. Take it in a sequential and sensible manner. Don't try to jump to the biggest thing you can think of the first time. But generally speaking, you already are versed in magic, even if you've never done it, because you've been doing it unconsciously. And when you realize that, it makes it a whole different field. So with that, I'm going to conclude the seminar. I'm going to turn off the recording, and then we'll be able